I never thought a Craigslist ad would change my life, let alone threaten it. I was broke, 4 months behind on rent, and drowning in job applications that led nowhere. So when I stumbled on a posting for an overnight security position at a closed amusement park, I clicked it with the same shrugging indifference I reserved for lottery tickets or scratch-offs, 1 in a million, maybe less. The pay was unusually generous for such a dead-end gig, $1,200 a week, no questions asked, cash under the table. No experience required, just a willingness to stay from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. and report any suspicious activity. The message ended with one line in bold red font: "Do not enter the park grounds under any circumstances." At the time, I didn't think much of it. Hell, it sounded like a dream job. Sit in a dusty office for 8 hours, sip coffee, play games on my phone, get paid. What could possibly go wrong? I arrived just before sunset, steering my rattling Honda Civic through the rusted front gates of Whimsy World, a once booming theme park that had been shuttered in the mid-90s after a string of mysterious disappearances and a tragic ride malfunction that had killed a family of 3. The place had been left to rot ever since. The lot was overgrown with weeds, the paint on the carousel was peeled like sunburned skin, and half the sign at the entrance was missing. It simply read: "The air inside the security office turned heavy, like a vacuum had been pulled tight around me, pressing against my chest and ears with invisible force, and for a full minute, I forgot how to breathe properly." The mascot on the screen didn't move, not in the way something alive should move, but there was a pulsing stillness to it, a kind of waiting. Its costume, a faded blue bear with smeared paint across the cheeks, was torn at the seams, revealing filthy foam stuffing oozing out like decayed muscle. One of its gloved hands was raised in what looked like a wave, though the gesture felt more like a taunt. I blinked, just once, and it vanished. I scrambled for the security feed control panel, flipping back through the timestamp, going frame by frame. It was there, one frame, and then it wasn't. No walking, no turning, no footsteps, just empty sidewalk and the faint flicker of broken neon above the Hall of Mirrors entrance. That's when I heard it. A sound no adult wants to hear in the dark, alone, at 2 in the morning inside a place that hasn't hosted a living soul in over 2 decades. It was the unmistakable, playful, high-pitched giggle of a child. At first, I thought it might be coming from the monitor, maybe a glitch in an old recording or some leftover power loop running on an ancient speaker system, but then the laughter happened again, this time louder, closer, and with more voices. It wasn't one child, it was several. They weren't playing, they were giggling. Whispering. Gurgling. The kind of joy that only kids on the verge of something wickedly fun can produce. I turned toward the hallway, the one just outside the office, and my blood froze. The corridor was dim, barely lit by the red emergency bulbs lining the ceiling, but I saw movement at the far end, not full bodies, just fleeting silhouettes, small shadows that darted between the doorways and danced just out of view. I gripped the flashlight on the desk like a weapon, even though I already knew instinctively it wouldn't protect me from whatever was out there. Just then, all the monitors in front of me went black. Not one by one, all at once. Complete darkness, followed by static. And then, softly, so faint I almost thought I imagined it, a distorted voice came through the intercom next to my head. It sounded childish, but slowed down, like a cassette tape melting in the sun. "Come, play with us." I slammed my hand down on the desk, yanked the radio from its charger, and screamed into it, hoping someone, anyone, was still listening. But there was nothing. Only silence, and then, the faint ding-ding-ding of the carousel bell. The sound was warped, dragging and off-key, but unmistakable. I looked up at the camera feeds just as they flickered back to life, though only one monitor came on, the one facing the carousel. The ride was moving again, turning slowly in the dark, though the power to it was long since disconnected. The horses were moving too, but they weren't bobbing like normal. They were twitching. Jerkily. And something was riding one of them. I leaned in, my heart in my throat, squinting at the monitor as the carousel made another slow rotation. And then I saw it. One of the mascot suits, the same one from before, perched on a horse, head tilted back unnaturally far, arms hanging limp at its sides, legs dragging like broken stilts, and as the horse passed the camera, it turned its head toward me and opened its mouth. There were teeth inside. Human teeth. Wet. Smiling. And then, all the power in the building went out. The only building that still had power was the security station, a squat, windowless box that smelled like mold and bleach. Inside, it was as depressing as expected, a flickering ceiling light, a bank of dusty monitors, a stained swivel chair, and a dusty bulletin board with faded safety posters. The first red flag should have been the logbook. The last recorded shift was 3 weeks ago, signed only with the name Rick in all caps. Next to it, a single sentence, something in the Hall of Mirrors is still moving. I assumed it was a prank or a desperate attempt to inject some mystery into an otherwise dull job. I chuckled to myself, locked the door, and settled in for what I expected to be a boring night. But by 2:14 a.m., I knew something was wrong. Deeply, terrifyingly wrong. It started subtly, the monitors would glitch for just a second, flashing black before resuming as if nothing had happened. Then I noticed the carousel, dead for decades, slowly turning, no lights, no music, just the mechanical creak of wood against rusted steel. I tried to radio someone, anyone, but all I got was static and a low-frequency hum that sounded like breathing. And then came the laughter. Not adult laughter, not nervous chuckles or ambient city sounds, but the clear, piercing giggles of small children. It echoed through the hallway outside the security office, despite the fact that every gate to the park was locked, every ride chained, and the park had been legally declared unsafe. I stood frozen, every hair on my body standing like needles. I stared at the monitors, all 12 screens showed empty pathways, rusted rides, and unmoving shadows. Except one. On camera 9, in front of the Hall of Mirrors, stood a figure in a costume. A mascot, large and padded, its face too blurry to make out, except for the eyes. The eyes weren't cartoonishly wide or stitched with felt like you'd expect. They were real. Bloodshot. Staring straight at the camera. And somehow, straight at me. The darkness inside that office wasn't normal. It wasn't just the absence of light, it felt like something thick and alive had crawled into the room and draped itself over me, whispering silently just outside my hearing. I stood completely still, holding my breath as my eyes tried to adjust, but there was nothing to adjust to, no ambient glow, no blinking monitors, no soft hum of electrical equipment, just a crushing silence so deep I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears like drums in an empty cave. I reached slowly into my jacket pocket, feeling for the cheap plastic flashlight they'd given me when I started the shift. My hand was slick with sweat, shaking as I clicked the button, and the dim yellow beam sputtered to life like a candle trying to stay lit in a storm. I swept the light across the desk, then the walls, then toward the small, rectangular mirror mounted above the first aid kit near the door, the one I hadn't even noticed earlier. I wish I hadn't looked. I swear to you, I wish I hadn't looked. In the reflection, I was standing alone, except I wasn't alone. Over my shoulder, just behind me, was a figure. Not fully in focus. Just a shape. But the part that shattered me wasn't what I saw, it was what I didn't feel. No breath. No sound. No weight in the room. Just a figure that shouldn't be there, and yet had always been there. Watching. I spun around so fast I nearly slipped on the floor, heart hammering like a gunshot in my ribs, ready to swing the flashlight like a weapon, but there was nothing. Just the empty room. My reflection alone again. But something had changed. I turned back to the mirror and froze, flashlight trembling in my grip. My reflection was no longer copying me. I moved. It didn't. I blinked. It stared. I took a step back, and the reflection smiled. Its teeth were jagged. There were stains on its uniform that hadn't been on mine, dark smears down the front of the shirt like dried blood or oil. The flashlight flickered again, and for one split second, the image in the mirror wasn't me anymore. It was the mascot. The same one from the carousel. The blue bear, head twisted at a sickening angle, fur stained and matted, human teeth jutting from the grinning mouth like shattered glass. I stumbled backward and knocked over the metal chair, crashing to the floor, ears ringing as panic set in like fire in my lungs. I could see the tiny power light, but it wasn't glowing. It had been ripped out. Then the knock came. From the other side of the door that led to the hallway. The door I had locked. I turned toward it, every cell in my body screaming not to move, but my feet dragged me closer like I was on strings. The knock came again, harder this time, like something testing the strength of the metal. And then it stopped. Silence, again. I leaned in, barely breathing, and pressed my ear to the door. Nothing. And then, tap tap tap, on the glass behind me. I turned, cold washing through me like ice water, and saw it. The mirror had cracked. A single spiderweb fracture in the center. And inside the reflection, I was gone. Replaced by something else. Something dressed in my uniform. Something smiling wide enough to split its face. I dropped the flashlight. The room went dark again. But I swear to you, I wasn't alone in that office anymore. I didn't sleep when the sun came up. I didn't even blink. I just sat in the corner of that filthy security room, knees pulled tight to my chest like a child, eyes fixed on the cracked mirror that refused to reflect me anymore. When the light finally crept in through the high, dust-choked window, something inside me shifted from pure fear to something colder, obsession, maybe, or a growing realization that whatever this place was hiding, it wasn't done with me yet. I had this gnawing need to understand what was going on, not just because I wanted to survive, but because I felt like I had already stepped too far into it. I needed answers, not hope. After all, hope gets people killed in places like this. The power flickered back on at around 6:47 a.m., just as the birds outside began to chirp like nothing in the world was broken. I stood slowly, every bone in my body aching, and went straight to the desk drawer I had ignored the night before. It was locked. Of course it was. But the top of the desk was lined with peeling laminate, and under it, I noticed a tiny piece of electrical tape barely clinging to the corner. I peeled it back and found a single brass key, taped into the wood like it had been hidden by someone who never expected to return. What I found inside that drawer still makes my hands tremble when I think about it. Stacks of faded manila folders, most of them swollen from age and moisture, all of them labeled with dates and names and one word that repeated over and over in red ink, missing. I flipped through them, one by one, each file more disturbing than the last. Children. Employees. Entire families. Some names were familiar, ones I'd heard on urban legend forums, those stories people joke about online without believing a word of. But here they were. Official reports. Photographs. Police statements. Handwritten notes from what looked like park staff and security. One entry made me stop cold. It was dated August 11, 1997. Subject, James Holloway. Night shift security. Reported screaming from Laughland Maze. Entered after curfew. Not found. Costume retrieved the next morning, still warm. I read that line over and over again. The phrase still warm repeated in my mind like a warning written in static. At the bottom of the file was a grainy Polaroid, too dark to make out much. But there was a shape slumped in the corner of a maintenance tunnel. It looked like one of the mascot suits, head tilted to the side, one arm raised in a limp wave. Just like mine had done. And then I realized the maintenance tunnel in the photo was only about 50 feet from where I was standing. I don't know what possessed me to do it, maybe the same thing that made those other guards go looking when they should have run, but I left the office as the sun kept rising, flashlight in hand, and walked toward the tunnel behind Laugh-Land Maze. The pathway was choked with leaves and trash, and something about the silence felt too complete, like the park was holding its breath. I reached the tunnel entrance and stood there, staring into the black maw that gaped like an open throat. The air inside was cold. Not naturally cold, unnaturally, deathly cold, like it had never known sunlight. I stepped in, 1 foot at a time, the walls narrowing around me. My flashlight flickered but stayed lit, and I kept moving, counting my steps. 24. 25. Then I saw it. Lying in the corner, half covered in dust and cobwebs, was a mascot costume. The blue bear. The same damn one. Only this time, it wasn't standing. It was folded over itself like a deflated balloon. But what made my stomach twist wasn't the costume, it was the smell. The thick, rotting, wet meat smell of something that had once been alive. And when I leaned in, the head of the costume snapped toward me, fast and violent, eyes wide and full of hate. I dropped the flashlight, screamed, and ran into the dark, not caring where I was going. And somewhere behind me, from deep inside the tunnel, I heard a voice that didn't belong to anything human. It rasped one word, slow, guttural, like it was choking on every syllable, James. I didn't go home. I couldn't. Not after what I saw in that tunnel, not after hearing my name in a voice that sounded like it had never belonged to a throat built by nature. I stayed until dusk crept back in like a bruise spreading across the sky, and as the light faded, so did any last trace of normalcy. Something had changed in the air, like the park had tasted me and wanted more. I knew I should leave, walk away, block the number, burn the uniform, but something pulled me deeper, something cold and oily that curled around my curiosity and whispered that the truth was only a few steps further in. That night, the monitors were working again, at least mostly, though static still chewed through the feeds like termites on wood. One camera, however, showed something I hadn't seen before. The door to the Laugh-Land Maze, which had been boarded shut and padlocked, was wide open, not broken, not forced, just politely ajar, like an invitation written in silence. I stared at it for a long time, as if the longer I watched, the more it would make sense. But of course, nothing made sense anymore. Eventually, I stood, took the flashlight, and told myself I'd only peek inside. Just enough to prove it was empty. Just enough to silence the whisper in my skull. The moment I stepped into the maze, the temperature dropped so fast my breath fogged instantly, like I'd passed through a membrane separating the park from something much older and crueler. The walls were made of faded canvas stretched tight over rusted metal frames, covered in childlike graffiti, bright clown faces, swirls of color, and cartoon animals with eyes too big and black. The floor beneath me creaked with every step, some boards soft with rot, others stiff as bone. I moved carefully, flashlight cutting swaths through the dark, revealing more unsettling details, a half-eaten corn dog molded to the wall, a doll's head nailed to the ceiling, and the word "stay" scratched repeatedly into the wooden beams. The sound of my own breathing was deafening. I turned a corner and stopped dead in my tracks. At the far end of the narrow passage was a pile of children's shoes, dozens of them, all sizes, some brand new, some melted and disfigured, all coated in a thick layer of dust that rose in a cloud as I approached. My stomach twisted as I realized one of the shoes was blinking. Not metaphorically, literally blinking. Its little LED light, embedded in the heel, was flashing red, even though it looked like it hadn't been touched in years. I knelt slowly, reaching out to touch it, and that's when I heard it. A wet dragging sound from behind me. Slow. Slithering. Unmistakably real. I turned the flashlight over my shoulder, hands trembling so badly the beam danced against the wall, and for the briefest moment, I saw a figure. Not a full person, just a piece. A leg, bent in the wrong direction. Fur, blue and slick with something thick and black. It disappeared before I could scream. My heart was slamming against my ribs, and the walls of the maze suddenly felt too tight, like they were closing in. I began to backtrack, stumbling through the twisting passages, losing all sense of direction, until I emerged into what must have been the center of the maze. There, beneath a broken overhead fixture that still sparked weakly, was an old, circular stage, and on it stood 5 mascot suits, lined up in a row like mannequins waiting for an audience. They didn't move. They didn't breathe. But every single one was facing me. And then, one of them lifted a hand, slowly, creaking like dried wood, and pointed directly at me. A speaker somewhere above me crackled, and the park's old jingle began to play, warped and slowed, each cheerful note dragged through something horrible. I turned to run. I didn't look back. But I swear on everything that when I reached the exit, every path behind me had vanished, replaced by walls that hadn't been there before. I was no longer in the maze. I was part of it now. I didn't escape the maze, it let me go. That's the only way I can describe it. One moment I was lost in a tangled nightmare of dead ends and smiling corpses frozen in fiberglass suits, and the next, I turned a corner and was standing back at the main gate, panting like a hunted animal, covered in cold sweat and blood that didn't belong to me. My flashlight was missing. My watch had stopped. And for several minutes, I stood staring at the dark carousel that loomed quietly in the distance, half expecting it to begin spinning on its own again. But it didn't. The park was still. Watching. Waiting. I stumbled back into the security room, locked the door behind me, and sat in the same filthy chair where this all started. Something inside me broke open then, a numbness spreading in my chest like rotten wood. I reached for the drawer again, that drawer with the files, and pulled out the stack marked staff records, hoping, praying that I'd find some clue, some reason why this place was doing what it was doing. I opened the first folder and saw his name, Rick Alvarez, night guard. Next to it, disappeared. Last seen April 2009. Security footage missing. Door found open. The next one said Jonah Clemens, last seen in 2011. Then Lana Brewster, 2014. And so it went. One by one. Always night guards. Always vanished without a trace. There were notes scribbled in the margins of some of the pages, frantic, messy handwriting like someone had been rushing, terrified even while writing. One file had the words, "They don't like being watched," written over and over again. Another simply said, "Don't fall asleep. They come when you sleep." But the worst was the one signed only with a shaky TW at the bottom. The note was almost a letter, addressed to no one in particular. If you're reading this, you've already seen them. Don't listen to the music. Don't look in the mirrors. Don't answer if they knock. They want a face. That's all they want. Once you give it to them, they never let it go. The handwriting faded near the end, like the person writing it had been pulled away mid-sentence. And on the back of the page was a crude drawing, a mascot suit, featureless, holding something round and dripping in one hand, a human head. Beneath the drawing was one word scratched into the paper so deeply the page had nearly torn through, replacements. I felt sick. The kind of sick that curls up in your soul and stays there, no matter how many times you breathe or blink or tell yourself you're still alive. And that's when the monitors came back on again. All of them. Every single feed. 12 cameras, 12 grainy screens. And in each one, I saw a mascot suit. Every one of them standing in a different part of the park, on rooftops, in hallways, by the food stalls, outside the office. And all of them were facing the cameras. Facing me. I backed away from the desk slowly, heart crawling up my throat. One of the monitors, camera 3, began to flicker and zoom. But I hadn't touched anything. The screen pushed in tighter and tighter until the image resolved into something horribly familiar. My own face. But not in real time. It was a loop of me from earlier that night, sitting in the chair. Only the version of me in the video wasn't alone. Behind him stood the Blue Bear mascot, head bent, arms raised, and just before the video cut to black, it lunged forward, wrapping its arms around my shoulders like a lover. I turned away, bile rising in my throat. And then the message appeared on every screen at once, typed in red pixelated letters that pulsed like a heartbeat: "Your shift isn't over." At first, I thought maybe I was hallucinating. My brain, desperate to make sense of what was happening, tried to rationalize it all: stress, lack of sleep, carbon monoxide poisoning, even some twisted marketing ploy that went wrong. But none of those explanations could account for what I saw next, because I know I locked the doors. I know every entrance to the park had been sealed tight, and yet, as I watched the security feeds, those grainy windows into every darkened corner of this rotting playground, something began to shift. At 2:11 a.m., the mascot in camera 6 turned its head. Just slightly. Not enough for someone casual to notice, but I was watching, frozen, unblinking. Its oversized foam head tilted a fraction to the left, and then again, further this time. I leaned closer to the screen, trying to tell myself it was just the signal glitching, a dropped frame maybe, but then, in camera 9, another mascot raised its arm and waved. The same wave I'd seen in the mirror. The same dead, puppet-like movement. The monitors began to flicker in sync, each one pulsing in a slow rhythm like a heartbeat, and the worst part, the absolute worst part, was that every time the screen glitched, the mascots were in a different position. Not walking. Not running. Just closer. Always closer. By 2:22 a.m., I had barricaded the security office with anything I could find: filing cabinets, an overturned desk, a metal chair shoved under the door handle, but I knew it wouldn't matter. I stared at the monitors, jaw clenched so tight I felt my teeth grind together, as the mascots began to surround the office. One stood outside the west hallway. Another crouched behind the snack booth. And one of them, was right outside the window behind me. I couldn't see it, but I heard it. A soft dragging sound, like cloth over concrete. I held my breath, praying it would pass, but then the knocking started. Not banging. Not pounding. Just a soft, steady tap tap tap, as if someone was gently testing the glass. I turned my head, slow as stone, and saw it, just the top of a head, blue fur matted with something dark, just barely visible above the windowsill. The mascot didn't move. But then a second head rose beside it. Then a third. Their eyes weren't cartoonish or silly anymore. They were empty holes. Blacker than black. Staring at me with hunger. I backed away from the window, nearly tripping over the drawers I'd emptied earlier. That's when every monitor in the room changed at once. No static. No camera feeds. Just a single, synchronized image, a wide shot of the carousel. Only now, it was lit up. Bright. Whirling. Playing music. And seated on every horse was a mascot. Dozens of them. Riding. Twisting. Some without heads. Some with heads that didn't match their bodies. One of them, I swear to you, was wearing my uniform. It wasn't a camera feed anymore, it was live. A view from nowhere, from outside, showing me something I was never supposed to see. And then, without warning, the carousel stopped mid-spin, jerking to a halt like it had hit something. The lights snapped off. The screen went dark. And on the glass of the window beside me, written in a greasy, childlike smear, were the words, "Let us in." I don't remember falling asleep. I don't remember giving in, not after everything I'd seen, the mascots, the message on the glass, the looping footage of myself replaced by something wearing my clothes and my face. But when I opened my eyes, it was morning, or at least, it looked like morning through the smeared, dust-caked windows of the security office. I sat up quickly, heart pounding, lungs aching, throat raw from screaming I didn't remember doing. Everything looked normal, too normal. The monitors were off. The hallway was quiet. My barricade was untouched, like the night before had been nothing more than a fever dream. For a brief second, I thought maybe I'd snapped. Maybe the pressure had finally broken something loose in my brain. But then I reached for the door handle and twisted it, and it didn't budge. I tried again. Nothing. I yanked harder, jiggled the lock, slammed my shoulder into it until my skin bruised, but it was useless. I was sealed inside. Not locked, welded. The hinges were melted. Fused shut. Something didn't want me to leave. Something had closed the park from the inside. I turned to the monitors again, praying for power, and as if hearing my thoughts, they flickered to life, one by one, humming softly like something breathing on the other side of the glass. Each screen now showed the same thing, the entrance gates. The main path. The roads leading in and out. All of them choked in thick fog, the kind that rolled unnaturally, pressing itself into every corner of the frame, too dense to be weather. And in that fog stood shadows. Human-shaped. Still. Facing the gates. Waiting. I counted 7 at first. Then 10. Then more, dozens. They didn't move. They didn't speak. But something about them told me they weren't trying to get in. They were watching to make sure nothing got out. My phone had no signal. The landline emitted nothing but static. And then, as if on cue, the power surged again, not down, but up. Lights flickered violently. The overhead fluorescence burst in a shower of sparks. The intercom crackled with white noise before a new sound slid through the static like a knife through skin, carousel music. Again. Only this time, it wasn't distant. It was right outside the door. I backed away, inch by inch, as the lights in the hallway went dark one by one, pop, 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 each bulb exploding in sequence, crawling closer to the office. The music got louder. Slower. Twisted into something unholy. I grabbed the nearest object, an old rusted crowbar from the tool shelf, and turned just in time to see a mascot's shadow stretch across the frosted glass of the office door. The silhouette was wrong. Its arms too long. Its fingers too sharp. Its head slumped to one side, like it was broken at the neck but still grinning. I heard the doorknob rattle once. Twice. Then it stopped. Silence. And then, softly, as if whispered right beside my ear, "You're already one of us." I screamed. Not because I thought it would save me, but because I felt something moving beneath my skin. Like a costume too tight. Like a mask slowly stitching itself into my face. And unnatural it makes the hairs on your arms rise before your ears can catch the absence. That's what I stepped into when the office door finally opened on its own. Not with a bang or a creak, but a slow, patient hush, as though the thing on the other side wanted me to know that it could come in whenever it wanted, that it had only been waiting for me to surrender. The hallway beyond was empty, though I could feel the weight of something just around the corner, like a breath behind the wall, like the air had a pulse. The lights above buzzed softly as if deciding whether to flicker or die, casting long, unsteady shadows that twitched every time I moved. There was no more carousel music, that had stopped the moment the door opened, but now a different sound replaced it. It was the low groan of metal. Rusted hinges. Chains pulling taut. Something big was moving. And I didn't know why, but every instinct inside me screamed ride. The ride was ready. The ride was calling me. I don't remember choosing to walk toward the tunnel of whimsy, but somehow my feet found the path, like it had been laid into me, carved from whatever this place had already taken. The ride's faded sign hung above the entrance like a crooked smile, the painted letters bleeding from decades of rain and rot. The little swan boat, chipped, yellowed, cracked down the neck, waited for me at the edge of the water, bobbing gently, though there was no current. I stepped in, knees shaking, and the moment I sat down, the boat lurched forward on its own, drifting into the darkness like a coffin on a river. The tunnel swallowed me whole. Inside, the walls were lined with decaying murals of smiling mascots and grinning cartoon clowns, their eyes scratched out or crossed over with red paint. The air stank of mildew and iron. My flashlight barely pierced the gloom. Then, the mannequins began. At first, they looked like characters, like the original ride had used figures dressed as park employees, vendors, families frozen mid-laugh. But the closer I looked, the more wrong they became. Their faces weren't molded, they were human. Waxed over. Preserved. Their mouths sewn shut, their eyelids peeled back, their bodies posed in grotesque tableaus of twisted joy. One was sitting at a picnic table, hand resting on a rotting hot dog. Another was dressed as a ride operator, one arm raised in a wave while the other, clearly broken, hung limp at their side. I began to hyperventilate. I turned to jump out of the boat, but the water had changed, it was no longer clear, but thick and black, like oil or blood. And ahead, in the glow of flickering lights, I saw the stage. The final scene. The boat stopped before it. In the middle stood a life-sized version of the Blue Bear mascot, arms outstretched, mouth hanging open like a scream caught in permanent rewind. And at its feet lay a mascot suit, empty, open, waiting. As I stared at it, the lights dimmed, and from the darkness above, a voice that sounded exactly like mine echoed. "Step out. It's your turn." I don't know how long I stood there, staring at that limp, empty mascot suit laid out at the feet of the Blue Bear, waiting like a grave dug in fabric, but time didn't feel right anymore, not inside that tunnel. The air was buzzing, like the static you get before a thunderstorm, and I could feel something inside my head pulsing in rhythm with it, like my own thoughts had been hijacked and replaced with something ancient and wrong. The voice that sounded like me echoed again, softer now, coaxing, "Step out, we've been waiting." And suddenly, it wasn't just a suggestion. It was a command wrapped in velvet, familiar and final, curling around my bones. I tried to move in the other direction, but my legs didn't listen. I stepped out of the boat, and the water hissed beneath me, swallowing the vessel whole the moment I left it. The ground beneath my feet was soft, squishy, like the mascot suit was already merging with the floor, or maybe with me. The lights overhead began to spin, carousel bulbs rotating faster and faster, illuminating the frozen wax faces along the tunnel walls, all of them now turned toward me. And then I heard them whisper in unison, voices dry and hollow, layered atop one another like a choir of corpses, "You belong here now." I don't remember putting the suit on. I don't even know if I did. One moment I was standing there, shaking, sobbing, trying to scream and not hearing anything but static in my own ears, and the next, I was warm. Not comfort warm, but suffocating, like being wrapped in fur soaked in something thick and metallic. I could feel my skin sliding against the inside, like the suit was pulsing, tightening, merging. I tried to tear it off, but my fingers were gone, replaced by padded hands with claws I couldn't control. My reflection appeared in a shattered funhouse mirror embedded into the tunnel wall. I was still me, but I wasn't. My eyes were wide, bloodshot, sunken into a face that smiled too hard, too wide. I had become the thing. A mascot. Another hollow guardian of this place, preserved in smiling horror. I collapsed to my knees, but I didn't fall. The suit held me upright, posing me like a toy on display. From somewhere deeper inside the ride, I heard footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate, and I knew without seeing that it was another one, coming to escort me to the carousel, to join the others. So here I am. I'm still here. In the park. Every night I watch the screens. Every night the gates rattle. Every night the fog rolls in, bringing another poor soul through the front doors. I try to scream, try to warn them, but no sound comes out. I'm just a watcher now. A piece of the exhibit. I don't sleep. I don't eat. I don't blink. And the worst part? I think I'm starting to forget my own name. If you're hearing this, reading this, whatever form this story takes, it means the message made it through. Maybe you're the next night guard. Maybe you've already accepted the job. Maybe you've already stepped into the booth and seen the blue bear smiling at you from the shadows. If so, I beg you, don't stay. Don't listen to the music. Don't follow the voices. And for God's sake, don't put on the suit.